Okay, we're on to Luke 7. Okay, so Jesus heals a centurion's slave. When Jesus finally finished saying all those things to the people, he went to Capernaum. And a Roman officer there had a servant who was very dear to him. And the man was sick and about to die. So the officer heard about Jesus, so he sent some Jewish elders to ask him to come and heal his servant. They begged him, telling him the man deserves your help. He loves our people. He himself built a synagogue for us. So, this is unusual, the way that he's talking about the slave. So the officer said, the officer then said, I'm not worthy for you to come in my house. If you just give the order, my servant will get well. And Jesus was surprised that the Roman soldier's faith. He remarked, I've never found faith like this, not even in Israel. So the messengers went back to the officer's house and found his servant well. Do you see how much God appreciates a deep faith? That's all he wants, is for us to know and follow his word, but not for him. He wants us to do it for us. So this is a completely unusual thing to happen. They went home and found him well. According to studylight.org, he had a completely unusual attitude to his slave. He loved his slave and would go to any trouble to save him. In Roman law, a slave was defined as a living tool. He had no rights. A master could ill-treat him and even kill him if he chose. A Roman writer on the estate management recommends the farmer to examine his implements every year, his tools, and to throw out any that are old or broken, and to do the same with his slaves. Normally, when a slave was past his work, he was thrown out to die. The attitude of this centurion to his slave was quite unusual. And if you notice, he also recognized he had authority over some soldiers, and he was saying to them how obedient his slave was. And it also seems that they may have even shared faith in, because, he talked about how the slave built the synagogue. Of course, he was obedient, so I don't know. But then the last part is, and I'm not going to go too much into here, but there's more on Study Light that's really good. But I think that this is important. The Roman soldier also had an extremely unusual attitude toward the Jews. If the Jews despised the Gentiles hated the Jews. Anti-Semitism is not new. It's not a new thing, obviously. The Romans called the Jews a filthy race. They spoke of Judaism as a barbaric superstition. They spoke of the Jewish hatred of mankind. They accused the Jews of worshiping an ass's head, a donkey's head, and annually sacrificing a Gentile stranger to their God. True, many of the Gentiles, weary of the many gods and loose morals of paganism, had accepted the Jewish doctrine of the one God and the Jewish ethic. But the whole atmosphere of this story implies a close bond of friendship between the centurion and the Jews. He was a very humble man. He knew quite well that the strict Jew was forbidden by law to enter a house of a Gentile, according to Acts, just as he was forbidden to allow a Gentile into his house or have any communication with him. He would not have ever come to Jesus himself. He persuaded his Jewish friends to approach him. This man, who was accustomed to command, had an amazing humility in the presence of true greatness. Wow, that to me was amazing. Jesus raises a widow's son at Nain. Soon afterward, Jesus went into a town and he arrived at the gate of a funeral procession that was coming out. The dead man was the only sign of a widow was the only son of a widow. When the Lord saw her, his heart filled with pity for her. And he said to her, "Don't cry." Then he walked over and touched the coffin of the man carrying it. Stopped, and Jesus said, "Young man, get up." I tell you, the dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. They were all filled with fear and praise. "God, a great prophet, has appeared among us," they said. God has come to save his people. This news about Jesus went out through the entire country and the surrounding territory. We know the common story of Lazarus. It's very well known, but I think this is a lesser known story. I think it's different than the Lazarus story, which was more close to Jesus and his family. They were like family to them. This was a man he didn't know, and it was pure compassion for some person he just meets, that we all feel when we see someone grieving, and we just think, what can I do to help? And we want to do something for them. Well, he did exactly what he could do. He rose the man from the dead, and that's a beautiful story. And Jesus could feel that for a stranger's mother. Can you imagine the deepest love he has for his own? Imagine how much he suffered watching his mother witness his prolonged beating and crucifixion and death. Christ's love is so deep and his compassion is so great. I am certain that I could never love his mother more than he does. She deserves our respect and love and compassion. And when anyone talks against her, like the protesters, it breaks my heart for Christ. I can't imagine how he feels when his mother is called just a woman or just a womb. It's like, God forgive them. We can't give back but a drop in the bucket of compassion that Christ gives us, all the suffering he did for us. My God, the very least people could do is respect his mother, Messengers from John the Baptist. Do you know, when you read the story, you might think, well, why is John sending messengers? He was Jesus's cousin. Didn't he already know that Jesus was the Son of God? But we don't really know that. He may have been sending these messengers ahead to ask for their sake, or he may have heard that Jesus was healing everyone, and that was his cue from God that this is the man he was supposed to make the way for, because of course he knew he was supposed to make the way. But the fact is, we really don't know if Mary and Joseph and Mary's cousin Elizabeth told the children, Jesus and John, because after they had the baby and came back from the census, the next thing we hear, Jesus is 12 years old and is amazing people in the temple. And his parents were admonishing him for disappearing and not letting them know. And the Bible says they didn't understand when he said, why didn't you know I would be in my Father's house? Didn't you know I must be there? And he went with them obedient. And it says right in the Bible, his mother kept these things in her heart. Mary kept that in her heart. And then it just says that Jesus increased in wisdom and favor with God and man. And that was it. And then it jumped to the preaching of John the Baptist. So we really don't know if John knew and grew up knowing, or if he just, realized this from hearing about Jesus, because it says John told him of these things, and John calling him, 2 of his disciples sent them to the Lord, saying, Are you he who comes, or shall we look for another? So I can't imagine that John actually knew until he had the sign that these 2 cousins didn't grow up knowing, because why would he ask a question like that? So So John, we don't really know if John knew or if it was revealed to him when he heard all the healings and then ultimately the raising of the widow's son from the dead. But either way, Jesus tells them, Let John know, yes. He answered him, yes. I have done all these healings and blessed, and blessed is he who takes no offense at me. So he's telling John, yes, I've done all this, and blessed is he who takes no offense at me. And to me, he's saying, blessed are those who don't have an ego that is so big that faith eludes them. Because if you notice, people with the biggest egos have very minimal faith in God. And those with distorted egos may wrap themselves up in God's power, but they have a hard time giving up that ego and humbling themselves before him. And that would be people like the Pharisees, that they thought they knew everything, and their big ego, they were the authority, and they really resented Jesus's authority. So then Jesus starts talking about John. And after he gives the message for them to say, yes, it's me, he starts talking, and he says, look, you're going, hold on. He says, look, you're going out to this man in the wilderness that was just simply dressed in simple clothes, and you could be going to all the kings that have the expensive clothing, but why aren't you? Because it was written that I sent my messenger to prepare the way. And let me tell you something, you all think he's great, but he's the least of the greatness of God. So John, he's telling him, yes, John is great, but John, yet he who is the least in the kingdom. So you're so amazed by John, but the kingdom of God is greater than he. So basically, that's what he's saying. When the people heard this, all the people went and got baptized by John, but the Pharisees and the lawyers rejected all of it. So, of course, Jesus is annoyed by this, and he tells the people a story back then, which is similar to our story today. If you look at this story, to me, it kind of reminds me of the story that we've heard about the helicopter. The one where the guy's stuck on the rooftop in a flood, and he was praying to God for help. And he's like, a man in a rowboat came, and the fellow shouted to him, jump in, I can save you. And the stranded fellow says, no, I'm okay. I'm praying to God. He's going to save me. So the rowboat went on, and then a motorboat came by, and the motorboat shouted, jump in, I can save you. And the stranded man said, no, thanks. I'm praying for God. He's going to come save me. I have faith. So the motorboat left, and then a helicopter came, and the pilot shouted, grab this rope. I'll pull you to safety. And the stranded man again says, no, thanks. I'm praying to God, and he's going to save me. I have faith. So the helicopter reluctantly flew away. So the water rose above the rooftop, and the man drowned. He went to heaven, and he finally got his chance to discuss the whole situation with God. And he said, I have faith in you. Why didn't you save me? You let me drown. I don't understand why. And God says, well, I sent you a rowboat, a motorboat, and a helicopter. What more did you expect? But then Jesus goes even deeper. He says here, I send you this guy. He is fasting, and he drinks no wine. See? I send you this. He drinks no wine. How much more pious can he be? And you complain that he's preaching and his deep connection to God, well, then maybe is a delusional demon. And then here I say, I am the Son of Man, and I come and I eat and drink, unlike John. And then you say, I'm a glutton and a drunkard. So I'm a glutton and a drunkard who eats with tax collectors and sinners. So basically, this has two warnings. First, it tells, this is what Study Light says, it tells of the perils of free will. The scribes and the Pharisees had succeeded in frustrating God's purpose for themselves. The tremendous truth of Christianity is that the coercion of God is not by force, but of love. It's precisely there we can get a glimpse of the sorrow of God. It's always love, greatest tragedy, to look upon some loved one who has taken the wrong way and to see what might have been, what could have been, and what was meant to have been. That is life's greatest heartbreak. Second, Study Light says, if he tells the perversity of men, John had come, living with a hermit's piousness, and the scribes and the Pharisees had said that some demon had taken his wits away. Jesus had come, living the life of men and entering into all their activities, and they had taunted him with loving earth's pleasures far too much. We all know the days when a child would grin at anything in the moods, and then nothing will please him. The human heart can be lost in perversity, in which any appeal God may make may be met with willful and childish discontent. So now I'm talking like the spoiled child. No matter what you give them, it doesn't matter. They're just deliberately fickle and unsatisfied. But there are few who answer, and God's wisdom is in the end justified by those who are his children. This is Study Light. Men may misuse their free will to frustrate God's purposes. Men in their perversity may be blind and deaf to his appeal. Had God used the force of coercion and laid on men the iron bonds of a will that could not be denied, then there would be a world of human imitation and a world without trouble. But God chose the dangerous way of love, and love in the end will triumph. And he adds that almost this is like the punchline here, yet wisdom is justified by her children, right? That's the very last line. And it says, but I like here what Study Light says about human judgment and wisdom. In verse by verse, it explains, John the Baptist, they said it was insanity and Christ's worldliness and irreligion. To the world, Christ replies that they were incompetent judges. None could recognize that divine life but those that lived it. So they didn't recognize it because they didn't live it. The reason why the average person recognized it is because they were living it. So what he's pointing out is their hypocrisy. They might know all the rules, but they don't have a Christian heart. And so it goes on that none justify wisdom except her children. Wisdom, under whatever form it might appear, the life of asceticism, I don't know how to say that, asceticism, or the social life, which would be justified or recognized by her children. Almost like he's saying, the sheep recognizes its herd. The sheep recognizes the shepherd. And so it goes a little deeper here about judgment, which is interesting, just a little part. So I wanted to share it. First, the tone of mind which capacitates for judging human character. By sympathy alone can you judge of character. This is the doctrine of the metaphor. A mother is changing her clothes and may be mistaken by her strangers. But under every change, she is recognized by her children who know her voice by the secret tact, meaning feeling of sympathy. So basically it's saying they recognize it by the feeling of intuition almost, like a kid will recognize his mother even if she changed her clothes. So the second one that could impede our judgment, so he's saying that could impede their judgment. So the second part that can impede is the tone of mind, which incapacitates the hindrances to right judgment of human character. The habit of insincere praise incapacitates for the forming of right judgment of character, because these Pharisees are praised. During the life of Jesus and the Pharisees, the Sadducees alike flattered him. To their unreal flatteries, he returned indignant replies. Why tempt ye me, ye hypocrites? Because that messes with the judgment. A light, satirical, and irreverent spirit also incapacitates. Because, of course, as important as they thought they were, they're quite ridiculous to Jesus when you think about it. Such ridiculous and absurd people cannot judge character. And they say here one reason is because jealousy. Jealousy incapacitates the forming of right judgment. You can't judge someone if you're jealous of them. The scribes were jealous of Jesus because his teaching was on the principle different from theirs. The Pharisees, because his righteousness was different than what they considered righteousness, especially that he was a humble carpenter's son. And then it goes real deep into humor and wisdom, but that's too much for us to go into. It's not necessary. One of the most important things, the last part, has two great warnings in it. First, it tells the perils of free will. The scribes and the Pharisees had succeeded in frustrating God's purpose for themselves. The tremendous truth of Christianity is that the coercion of God is not of force, but of love. Like what we just said, it's precisely there that we can glimpse the sorrow of God. It's always love's greatest tragedy to look upon some loved one who has taken the wrong way and to see what might have been, what could have been, and what was meant to have been. That's life's greatest heartache. So, now, I'm going to show you this part just to clear it up on what, because otherwise that could be a little confusing. It seemed like, but basically it's this. Sometimes you just can't win. In a certain neighborhood, a small building has been empty for a long time. The people complained because it was an eyesore. Then one day the place came alive with construction. And before long, it was a little grocery opened. It was doing very well, but there wasn't a parking lot. So soon, a lot more cars were parking on the streets. People in the neighborhood started to complain because now they couldn't always park right in front of their homes or apartments. They finally complained to the neighborhood council, who put up signs along the streets restricting parking. And the weather got colder, and the customers at the store started going other places where parking was easier. Eventually, one successful grocery went out of business. Once again, the building was empty, and soon the neighbors started complaining about the empty building. This is the very thing Jesus is talking about in that passage. He compares people's reactions with those of John's followers and his own. Sometimes you just can't win. Think about what you have complained about recently. Can you think of something positive to say as well? So basically, stop your complaining. That's really just it. Okay. A sinful woman is forgiven. So Simon and Pharisee invited Jesus to have dinner with him. Simon was a Pharisee, this particular Simon. So when Jesus went to that town, a very sinful woman, she had heard that Jesus was eating with the Pharisee's house, so she bought an alabaster jar full of perfume and stood behind Jesus, crying at his feet and wetting his feet with her tears. When she then dried his feet with her hair and kissed them and poured perfume on them. And as you know, the Pharisees, being Pharisees, said to himself, if this man were really a prophet, he would know who this woman is and who's touching him, and he would know how sinful of a life she lives. And Jesus, being the power from God that he was sad. He said, Simon, I have something to tell you. And Simon said, yes, teacher, tell me. And he tells him a story about two men who owed money to a moneylender. Let me move down. One owed 500 denarii, that's like silver coins, and the other owed 50 denarii. Neither could pay him back. So he canceled the debt of both. Which one would love him more, Jesus asks. And Simon says, well, that would probably be the one who was given, the one who owed more, the one who owed 500. That's, and Jesus says, you're right. And he turned to the woman. He said, Simon, do you see this woman? I came to your home and you gave me no water for my feet. But she washed my feet and her tears and with her tears and dried them with her hair. You did not welcome me with a kiss, but she has not stopped kissing my feet. Since I came, you provided no olive oil for my head, but she covered my feet with perfume. I tell you, the greater love she has shown proves that her many sins have been forgiven. But whoever has been forgiven little shows only a little love. And Jesus said to the woman, Go, your sins are forgiven. The others sitting at the table beyond say, well, who is this that even forgives sins? But, because they're like, only God can forgive sins, right? But Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. So basically, he let Simon and the Pharisees know, you're judging that woman for her sins, but her sins are forgiven. Yours, maybe not so much. So if Simon was a child of God, this Pharisee, he would know that Jesus was the Son of God. My sheep will recognize me, And if Simon was using his good and intuitive judgment, he would realize how Jesus just read his mind, and he would know that Jesus was more of a prophet. But see, he's caught up in the laws and the rules and just keeping those. And that's really the point that Jesus is making in that story. It has to be in your heart. So, okay, I'll see you tomorrow.